Thank you so much for coming. I hope you're enjoying the weekend. Beautiful weather here at Caltech. I'm Suleika. I'm a senior in Lloyd and Venerable House. I'm a computer science major, and I'm actually also interested in policy and politics. And Professor Alvarez's courses convinced me to pursue a second major in political science. Outside of academics, I'm part of the Caltech Y, and I also help host the Student Activism Speaker Series, and I play Ultimate Frisbee. So just a little bit about me. I'm really excited to be here with you, and as you all know, maybe you haven't counted the days on the calendar, but the election is only 16 days away, so today's talk will be very timely. Before I introduce Professor Alvarez, I just wanted to give a little layout of today's talk. Professor Alvarez is going to talk, and then we're going to have a Q&A session at the end. I'm from Plumbing House, and I'm an asshole. 17 days. That's including the day of the election. Yeah. I want to note the format for this talk. So afterwards, we're going to have a Q&A, and you can put your questions in on the Slido. So if you pull out your phones now, you can scan the QR code, and it'll take you to a website. So if you have any questions that come up during the talk, you can put them in, so then we can kind of moderate them. So with all of that out of the way, Professor Alvarez is the Flint Ridge Professor of Political and Computational Social Science and the founding co-director of Caltech's new Lind Center for Science, Society, and Policy. Professor Alvarez's research focuses on public opinion and voting behavior, electoral politics, statistical and computational modeling, and relevant today's talk, election technology and administration. Professor Alvarez is the co-director of the Caltech MIT Voting Technology Project and has been studying elections for almost 3 decades. To a lot of Caltech students, he's the professor who teaches all of the political science courses, and I'm in one of his courses on the 2024 election. Today, he'll be talking about some of the exciting work his group is doing using the tools of data science, machine learning, and AI in combating misinformation, as well as helping improve the security of election infrastructure and working with election officials to help them better address questions about election integrity. So with that, I'll turn it over to Professor Alvarez.
Great, thank you. Yeah. She's wonderful. So, many of you, I do see some familiar faces in the audience. I have had some of you in classes, but we really thought it would be wonderful to have one of our current political science students introduce this talk today. So thank you. Okay, we're going to talk about misinformation. I got a lot to talk about. We're close to the election, but I wanted to start by talking about our new center, and I'll be real quick on the new center. If anybody has any questions, we'll have a little Q&A at the end. We can talk about the Lind Center. We've been in operation now for about 2.5 years. We have been working mainly in the areas of the ethics of AI, climate sustainability, biotechnology, especially synthetic biology, and also democracy. So we've got a pretty broad mandate. The idea is to help facilitate policy-relevant research on campus, and also to help improve Caltech's ability to participate in a lot of the important policy debates that are ongoing today, to bring our science into policy in Sacramento, and more importantly, in Washington, D.C. So we're very excited about it, happy to talk about it, and also if anybody's interested about helping us with the center, please let me know. Okay, so misinformation. I know you're probably hearing a lot about this these days, and there's a lot of misinformation floating around, and I'm going to give you some examples of some of that. Just to start this talk, just so you know, you're getting kind of a sneak peek. We haven't released any of this data yet. This talk is going to be a talk that I'm actually going to record. This is a trial run for that. On Monday, we're going to be releasing this as basically a set of guidelines for election officials to help them combat misinformation and disinformation as we get into the final stages of this presidential election, when it's going to be the most, I think, serious problem one of the serious problems they're going to be encountering. We use a pretty broad definition of misinformation in our research, and I'll just read it to you all. Misinformation is information that's false or misleading, irrespective of the intention or source. This is taken directly from some of our colleagues who work in this area, especially Sander van der Linden. You'll hear me mention him a number of times. He's participating in our research as a research collaborator. Misinformation's widespread right now about elections. I've had the great opportunity over the last couple of months to have conversations with many election officials and other election stakeholders. We've actually had a webinar series called Office Hours. We're going to have a couple of more episodes going into the election. They're all available on YouTube. You can go to our project website and see them there if you're interested. There are also podcasts now too on Spotify, so you can listen to them while you're driving around. We're trying to make them as widely available as we can. But in these conversations with election officials, I've talked directly with them about how they're handling misinformation, the kind of misinformation that is occurring in their states and in their counties, and really trying to help them understand strategies that they can use to help deal with the misinformation that they're encountering. There's also been a number of public reports, in particular one from Microsoft and a number from Microsoft have come out over the last couple of years, and also various federal agencies that have shown that there are systematic attempts by other countries to spread disinformation and misinformation about our elections. And some of these countries are also engaging in various kinds of cyber attacks on our nation's election infrastructure, as well as attacks that are aimed at the campaigns. Okay, so we also know that's happening in the background. Those are very, very serious attempts. Surveys, and I'll show you some survey data that we recently collected, show that many Americans have been so exposed to a lot of this misinformation that they come to believe it. Okay, and so that's a serious problem as well. Many Americans, unfortunately, believe that election fraud, various types of election fraud, is widespread, when in fact it is not. We've been doing research here at Caltech for the last 25 years almost on election administration and on election fraud, and we found that the incidence rate of pretty much every type of election fraud that people worry about is almost insignificant. I mean, just right in the trace levels. We also have a database that we're putting online. It says available on our website. It'll be available early next week about all the common myths and rumors and misconceptions about elections that we've been finding during our research this year and that we have encountered in our conversations with election officials. Now, there's an organization, this is a very handy website. They're in the US federal government called the CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. And they also work very closely with American election officials, state and county election officials. And they've compiled a database also of many of the election rumors and election myths that they found. And here are three of the common ones that they have found. One is that election officials don't clean voter rolls. I'm not going to go into the details about why that's false, but it's totally false. I talked about this in my undergraduate class just the other day about how false that is. Another one is that drop boxes aren't secure. False. Actually, my election class, this is their extra credit assignment for the next 2 weeks, is to go around LA County and look at drop boxes, okay, and evaluate them. And I'm pretty sure that their evaluations are going to come back saying they look pretty secure, okay? I'm pretty sure, but we'll see. Voting system software is not reviewed or tested. That's false. It is. It's very, very heavily reviewed, very heavily tested. Is it manipulated, easily manipulated? Not easily manipulated. Not easily manipulated. Can be manipulated. I mean, you can manipulate software if you have direct access to it, but easily, no. Because it's very, very difficult for a hacker, for some criminal to get access to our voting systems, and in particular, the underlying voting system software, and to do anything that wouldn't be immediately visible and immediately auditable. But again, these kind of rumors are floating around. They've been refuted by many, including us. And if you wanted to, just go on X. Okay, I'm sure that's one of many of your favorite sites these days, but X, or go on Facebook, go on Instagram, type these in, and you'll see them. Okay, you'll see people talking about these rumors, even though they have been widely refuted. All right, so in 2024, like I said before, many Americans, especially registered voters, believe that various types of election fraud actually occur frequently or commonly. This is survey data that we collected this summer. It's a large national sample, representative of the American population of registered voters. We collected it at the end of June through early July. And the paper's under review. We think it's going to be published any day now, so fingers crossed on that. In the parlance of academics, we've got to revise and resubmit. So we're hoping that that's going to be published. Now, I know the font is relatively small, but these were the rumors that we looked at, and these are the rumors that we're doing research on. They range from mail ballot fraud, paying voters, Dropbox fraud, non-citizen voting, registration fraud, impersonation, multiple voting, software hacking, ballot tampering, and official tampering. The pink bar is the proportion of American registered voters who think that these types of election fraud occur commonly or relatively frequently. And they range from about a third with official tampering to 4 in 10 American registered voters who believe that mail ballot fraud is common when it is in fact not. Okay, so again, these are the kind of attitudes that we're dealing with right now in the United States. Now, the other issue here is that unless we prevent and deal with this kind of misinformation, it has very pernicious consequences for our democracy. And this is why we really need to work hard over the next couple of weeks, and also probably in the aftermath of the election, which unfortunately may go on for weeks and weeks. It may actually go on all the way until January 20th. We don't know right now, okay? We just don't know. But election misinformation like this can erode confidence in our elections. Okay, we've got research that shows that these kind of beliefs in fraud is correlated with lower levels of trust and confidence in our election system. It can also affect the legitimate transfer of power. We saw that on January 6, 2021. Okay, so we saw the consequences of beliefs in this kind of misinformation back on January 6th. Now also, these kind of misinformation campaigns, so targeted misinformation campaigns, in particular ones that might use AI in today's environment, can be used to disenfranchise voters. So for example, okay, you can imagine a disinformation campaign that might tell voters in certain areas misinformation about how they cast their mail ballot, misinformation about where they might drop their ballot off, misinformation about where they can vote. Those kind of campaigns can be easily developed by AI, and they can be spread pretty quickly in today's world. And they can actually disenfranchise people. Okay? They can stop people from voting or make it hard for them to vote, make it so hard for them to vote that maybe their ballot doesn't get cast or it gets cast incorrectly and doesn't get counted. All right, so this misinformation is a serious problem. Now, the good news is that we've got strategies for dealing with it. And there's two main types of strategies. The first strategy is to try to counter this misinformation after it's been spread. This is fact-checking, which many of you have seen over the last couple of election cycles, or what people now call debunking, right, of election myths. And it's also something that our election community uses widely. And I'll show you a few examples of this. You may have seen some of this yourselves. Depending upon where you're from, many counties, many states have really developed very sophisticated campaigns to debunk misinformation in their jurisdictions. And the good news is also, like I said before, the academic research shows that debunking and fact-checking works. Okay, I have a reference at the end. It's in the slide deck if anybody's interested. There's a wonderful free resource that's online called the Debunking Handbook. And you can go in there and look at all the academic research that shows that these debunking strategies work. The other strategy is to try to counter it before it starts to spread, which is called pre-bunking or inoculation, right? Think about it as a vaccine, right? You've got a virus that's starting to spread in the population, misinformation, and what we want to try to do is try and see if we can't develop an inoculation strategy to prevent those who haven't been exposed from believing it when they get exposed. This is a newer tactic, but it's something that has seen a lot of academic research over the last few years. And the academic research on this, including some of the work that we're doing right now, and I'll give you a little snippet of that in a few seconds, shows that it might work better than pre-bunking. So if we can actually get out and inoculate people to be less resistant, or even not acceptant at all, to not be acceptant of this information, it may help stop the spread. So a very interesting tactic. Now, debunking. So this is the kind of work that we've done in the past on election integrity. What we've done in the past is work directly with election officials here at Caltech, colleagues at MIT, many other academics throughout the US. Work directly with election officials to try to understand how we can document facts about the integrity and security of their election system. This is one example in 2020. Here at Caltech, we had a big project in the pandemic to try to understand the integrity of California's voter registration system. This was super important. We started this in May. We went through the summer working directly with the Secretary of State's office and with LA County and Orange County. They were sending us copies of the voter file, either daily in the context of LA County or Orange County, or weekly in the context of the state. And we were developing algorithms here that we could use to find duplicate records and to find other types of errors in the file as the state prepared for the first use of universal voting by mail during the pandemic. So super helpful project. And throughout this, by doing this project, we were actually able to show, for example, I go back to that first myth I talked about, election officials don't clean voter rolls. Well, they do, okay? We actually help them do it. And through this project, we learn a lot about what election officials do to keep these voter rolls clean. It's actually a much more complicated problem than you might think, because these data are constantly being updated. There's many different organizations like DMV or other counties, all sorts of people have access to these data, so they're constantly in flux. And so errors can creep in, and again, we helped develop tools in 2020 to mitigate those problems. So we've done a lot of the debunking part in the past by helping provide facts to election officials. But what we're doing in this election cycle is pivoting. All right, we're trying to pivot to preventing the spread of misinformation, right, before it becomes entrenched, before we get to a point where a third or four out of 10 Americans believe in these different kinds of election rumors. Now, many of you, this is going to happen to many of you over the next couple of weeks. It's going to happen probably on into the fall. It's going to happen probably at Thanksgiving dinners, because who knows whether the election is going to be settled by then. It may very well not be. Okay, yeah, exactly. This is what I've been telling my undergraduate students in this presidential elections class. Like, my biggest fear is that we won't know, right, on into November, maybe even into early December, who's the winner of this election. Could very well happen. But there's a lot of research on how to talk to people who are disbelievers. And this is the sort of scenario that we heard a lot about from the election officials as we talked to them over the last couple of weeks. And election officials constantly counter people coming into their offices at community events who believe adamantly in many of these election falsehoods. There's an example that I've got here that I'll use for the next couple of minutes, is that there are many people who believe that provisional ballots are only counted when an election is close. I've heard this one for the last 25 years and have to constantly debunk this one. That is false. All provisional ballots are examined, and the ones that are eligible for inclusion in tabulation are included in the tabulation, regardless of how close the election is. They all get counted if they're valid ballots. But what should an election official do, or what should you do, right, in this kind of situation when you encounter someone who's got a firm belief in an election falsehood like this? The good news is, as I said before, there's a lot of research about this, and the good news is talking to people can really help talk them out of this, their belief in these rumors. My colleague, Sander van der Linden, has just written this beautiful paper, published in 2022. It's in Nature Medicine. It's open access. You can go find it and read it. He walks through the strategy of talking to disbelievers, people who believe very, very firmly in these kind of myths. Again, an election official or you encounter someone like this, we're scientists, right? You're engineers. Talk to them about the facts that you know. So as Sander has argued from his perspective as a social psychologist, the first thing you do is you present the facts and you tell them what the facts are. But importantly, you also have to warn them about the importance of not believing in this myth. right? What the consequences are of believing in this kind of myth. And also if it's embedded in some kind of conspiratorial thinking. Try to make them aware, right, of the fact that it's embedded in some kind of conspiratorial thinking or conspiratorial argument, because that can have really pernicious consequences as well. So try to explain that myth, and this is particularly important for election officials. And then again, scientists and engineers, repeat the facts. Okay, as you know, you all were Caltech students, right, or most of you were. Repetition of the facts is very important for persuading or educating someone in the truth. So these strategies can work. And again, we're arguing that election officials should continue to use these kind of strategies, and we as citizens, right, should educate ourselves on how to do this. We as scientists and technologists need to do better at this. This is not just a problem of election information. This is a problem of science denial in our society. Okay, so part of what I'm trying to do is trying to say, look, you can actually help change some of these things. Give them the facts, warn them about the myth, expose the technique if there's a technique behind it that you can see, and reinforce the facts again. Repeat the facts. Repetition, again, is very important here. There's other tips. Now, there's a wonderful book by Lee McIntyre. Lee McIntyre is a scientist who works in this area of misinformation. This book is called Talking to a Science Denier, right? I really recommend this book. It's a really great book. I've read it a number of times. And again, some additional tips for you and also for the election officials who we're going to be speaking to about this research over the next couple of weeks. One thing you have to remember is that disbelief or belief in these rumors and myths is a spectrum. There are some people who are going to be very firmly wedded in their beliefs about these misconceptions and myths. They're going to be hard to persuade. They're going to be really hard to persuade. We know that. And we know that those are the people who pre-bunking and debunking are going to be very hard to use in these cases to persuade them of the truth. Doesn't mean you shouldn't try, okay? But it means that you're going to have to try a bit harder and keep at it. Now, everything gets amplified on social media. We know that too. Okay, so especially for our election official community, we know that the disbelievers are using social media to spread their beliefs. And one of the things we have been encouraging election officials is don't hide, get back out there in social media and debunk these things on social media. I talked to an election official from Michigan, Barb Byron, and she's actively out there on social media every day, every time someone is saying something about how elections are poorly run in her county, Ingham County, which is East Lansing, Michigan. If anybody's from Michigan, it's here, I think. Those of you who are from Michigan, you know that way they use their hand. But get out there and be active on social media. And we see that, okay? If you go on, for example, LinkedIn, where a lot of election officials are, or X, many election officials are very active on social media now, working to debunk a lot of these myths. And we're also telling them just to keep at it. I mean, don't give up. And this is especially true for all of us as citizens, right? If we encounter people who are spreading misinformation or misconceptions, your friend, your neighbor, your family member, colleagues at work, be persistent. The only way this is going to change, right, is if we as citizens make it change. A couple case studies. I won't linger on this too much. I'll put this slide deck will be online, I think, on Monday, or a slide deck like it. If you live in Orange County, is anybody from Orange County? Orange County? Yeah, a couple of Orange County people. Wonderful election administration in Orange County. And the election official down there, Bob Page, has put together this great resource. If you go and you click on this link, there's a little drop-down menu that pops down. There's a bunch of different myths that they're encountering in Orange County, things that people are saying about elections in your county, and he debunks them on this website. It's a great example of how election officials can use the internet to debunk these myths. Our Secretary of State has developed a website, so many of you are in California voters. You can go to Shirley Weber's website. And again, there's a great resource here that debunks a lot of these myths. So again, if you're interested in this, if you've got a neighbor, friend, colleague, family member who firmly believes that election officials don't clean voter rolls or whatever the myth is, these resources are really helpful to find the facts that you can use to try to change their minds. Maricopa County, interesting case. Maricopa County's got a really wonderful website. Not only do they provide the facts and they debunk myths, they also have this comprehensive report, which if any of you are election geeks like me, you should read. It basically goes through and debunks all of the myths about the 2020 election in Maricopa County. Right? And many of you probably remember Maricopa County was front and center with a lot of conspiracy theories, a lot of myths, a lot of rumors, a lot of misconceptions about how elections were run there. And they've debunked most of them. It's good reading because, again, Maricopa County is going to be front and center probably in a couple of weeks in terms of a very close election. Arizona is a very important state. Maricopa County is a very important county and a very important state. So I think a lot of the same myths and misconceptions about Maricopa County will be floating around in just a couple of weeks. All right, pre-bunking. So that's debunking. That's the first step. Now we're going to talk about pre-bunking. So there's been a lot of recent research on pre-bunking in terms of dealing with conspiracy theories that are circulating, misinformation that's circulating. And again, my colleague Sandra van der Linden has been one of the real prominent scholars working in this space from the University of Cambridge. The idea here, again, as I said before, is to try to deal with inoculating people before they're exposed, right? So that they're equipped with the understanding that what they're going to be exposed to at some point is misinformation, and they're going to be able to psychologically deal with it and have the arguments kind of pre-prepared, right, for the misinformation when they encounter it. So we've been doing some studies on this, and this paper is not quite done yet, but we're close. First draft of it was about 8,000 words, and it needs to get to 3,000, which is professors' tasks on Monday, find how to cut those 5,000 words. But it's going to be available relatively soon, and we hope it gets into peer review relatively soon. But I'll give you a quick overview of what we've been doing in this initial study. We've been doing what's a pretty complicated set of survey experiments. And the idea here is to not only test the ability of pre-bunking to try to keep people from believing in false rumors, to see how it affects their confidence in elections if they're pre-bunked on a rumor, but to see if we can use AI to improve our ability to develop the pre-bunking arguments. All right, now why is that important? Well, that's important because AI tools like ChatGPT can be used by election officials or academics, but we can use them really quickly. And they're really good, okay, at developing arguments if we can develop the right prompts, right, engineer the right prompts to try to build a inoculation argument, right, when we have some type of misinformation. So what we do in this experiment is we have, in this particular study, we have, I think, 4,000 US registered voters. They all get asked a bunch of questions. That's before any treatment. We have 5 different rumors that they can be exposed to. They get assigned to one of them, and here the example is voter fraud. That's a voter fraud rumor that I'll talk a little bit more about. Some of them get assigned to a treatment condition. Some of them get assigned to control. The treatment condition people get exposed to an article, okay, that an LLM, ChatGPT, or one of the versions of it, has weakened. So we've taken the full exposure article, right, about voter fraud, and used the LLM to weaken the argument, right, to make it a little softer, but to also develop some warning information at the beginning, so people know this is a falsehood. This is not true. This is the kind of information you're going to get exposed to. They then get exposed to the full article. The people in the control don't get the inoculation, but they get exposed to the full article. We then ask them a bunch of questions again, right away. And then we go back 7 days later and interview them again and repeat some of the post-treatment questions to evaluate whether or not the treatment effect persists for at least 7 days. We need more money to do it for longer than 7 days, but that's an ongoing research project to see how long these kinds of inoculations work. So this is an example. This is the rumor that comes right from CISA. Widespread voter fraud occurs through various means at levels significant enough to sway election outcomes, which is not true. So what the LLM will do is we take the actual article about the myth and we produce a warning, and we basically soften the argument a little bit. The inoculation that is we developed for this particular article starts by saying politically motivated actors often attempt to manipulate public opinion about elections. There's a warning here. Okay, it's telling you that this is a warning. This is the strategy that's being used. Politically motivated people are going to develop these falsehoods. And then it says, for example, you might have come across alarming news articles about a so-called audit of the 2020 election in Maricopa County, conducted by a previously unknown company called Cyber Ninjas. Some of you may have remembered this one. Okay, so this is the warning that the LLM is generating in the inoculation for this particular treatment. Okay, I'm not going to read this, but this is the rest of the inoculation. It's about 5 paragraphs. All right, it's a relatively short thing that people in the survey have to read. It doesn't use inflammatory language, right? So the language gets softened a bit, but it gives them some sense for what they might be exposed to, right? If they're exposed to this kind of misinformation. And here's the concluding part of it. So that's what the inoculation looks like. Now, we find, interestingly enough, that it seems to work. So what we find is that the LLM-generated inoculation of pre-bunking will significantly reduce the belief in specific election myths. So people will be less likely to believe that the specific myth is true, like the voter fraud myth. And it's going to increase their confidence in election facts. And those effects do persist. Okay, so their understanding of the facts about voter fraud persists for at least a week. We don't know if it persists longer than that, but at least a week, that's good. That means if we start treating people now with these kinds of pre-bunkings, it may persist through election day, which is good. We also find when we ask people about their overall confidence in elections, in election administration, that their confidence in election integrity is increased post-treatment. It doesn't persist. That's a hard thing to change. But at least immediately, by pre-bunking, we can get people to be a little more confident in the outcome of elections. Now, one of the things that's really interesting in the work that we're doing is we're finding that the pre-bunking works across party lines. Works for Democrats, works for Republicans, and it works for independents, okay, which is an interesting, important result. And it also works for people who believe in conspiracy theories and other demographic groups. So we don't see a lot of heterogeneity in the treatment effect, to use a social sciencey phrase. So it looks like it's relatively consistent across most types of demographic groups. So the conclusion here, right, is that this LLM-assisted approach to pre-bunking can work. And I'll talk a little bit more about the specifics in a second, but to give you a little kind of taste of what's to come, the next step in this research project is to not just use LLM Assist to develop the inoculation arguments, it's to actually use an LLM chatbot to actually talk to the survey subjects and tailor the inoculation argument to the subjects, to their beliefs, and to how the language that they're using when they're talking about these election myths. And we're actually going to be doing that study sometime this coming week. We've got it all set up. The chatbot's built. It's got guardrails. We pre-tested it with my undergraduate class on Tuesday. It worked pretty well, right? They found some bugs in it. We pre-tested it again on Friday. And we do think we're going to be rolling that out at scale in a study of 6,000 American registered voters sometime this coming week. So what are the details here? So one way to think about these treatment effects, there's lots of complicated social sciencey stuff in our paper, but what we're trying to do is trying to think about these treatment effects in real terms, is to think about how full exposure, right, contrasts to pre-bunking exposure and its effects on election confidence, on confidence in the administration of an election, right? Just general confidence in election administration. And what we're finding here is that when we look at people and we think about whether or not we ask them a 10-point scale, how confident they are. And so we look at the proportion of people who are 5 or greater. These are the people who are relatively confident in the integrity of election. So when they're exposed as an untreated group to the full argument, okay, what we find is that the proportion of those untreated respondents who are confident in the election, okay, it falls from 68.4% to 63.9%, right, as we measure it immediately. So when they get exposed, right, in the control group to this full version, all right, of the argument, they get less confident, okay? Now, among our inoculated group, though, that proportion falls to in a much smaller way. In other words, the inoculation works. I mean, it doesn't change beliefs dramatically, but it works because the proportions change there from 69% to 66.2%. So a 4.5% difference gets reduced to about 2.8%. Right? It's not like earth-shattering, okay, but it's big, okay, because this means that the LLM generated pre-bunking article is preventing maybe about a third of the subjects in the sample, right, from being persuaded by the misinformation. All right, so that's a pretty strong result in social science terms. And again, like I said earlier, these results are consistent across party lines, but we don't find evidence that they persist for 7 days. Now, how does it matter for belief in the specific rumor? So in the case of the example here, the rumor about voter fraud. And again, we'll think about this in terms of how people fall on this a 10-point scale. But here it's a 10-point scale in their belief in the accuracy of the rumor. Is the rumor true? So we'll look at the proportion of people who are 5 or above. And what we find here is that the proportion of the untreated who believe in the specific rumor increases after exposure, right, to that full dose. It increases from 44.2% to 48.8%. So that article is powerful, right? Okay, it actually changes people. They are more likely to believe the rumor after exposure to it. But among our treated subjects, the proportions who believe in the accuracy of the specific rumor, it falls, right, after pre-bunking, okay? So it goes from 44.6% to 43.3%, which is a pretty strong result. These treatment effects are consistent across party lines, right? And they persist after 7 days. We don't know if they persist longer, but they persist for at least 7 days, which, many of you may have taken social science at Caltech. In the world of social science, that's pretty powerful. That's a pretty important result to see that this kind of persuasion persists for 7 days. So what we're going to be doing over the next few days, like starting Monday, is rolling this out as advice for election officials. So again, you're getting kind of a early view into what we're going to be trying to work with our election official colleagues on over the next week, is to try to not only continue to help them as they work on debunking arguments, but to start working with them to try to figure out how they can pre-bunk these arguments. The pre-bunk arguments that we developed for these election rumors are, well, they're already online. They'll be available on our website so election officials can use them. We're also going to develop similar pre-bunking arguments for the other myths and misconceptions that are in the CISA database. Post those online too. We're not going to test them because we don't have the resources to do that, but we're going to test them. And we're very excited about this because, again, it shows that this is one of the upsides to AI, right? We know AI, we've all heard about all the criticisms of AI, right? But this is a place where large language models can really help, right? We think that these large language models, if they're used in this way, can help build these pre-bunking inoculation arguments that work, and they can do it at scale, and they can do it at a speed that means that they can be used in near real time. And again, like I said earlier, we're going to be developing an actual chatbot that's going to do this interactively, right? And we're going to be testing that this coming week. So here are some of the resources I talked about. Again, the deck will be on our project website probably Monday. I do really recommend the Debunking Handbook. It's a great resource. Sanders' paper that's in Nature Medicine in 2020 is a really nice review. Some of you are taking the photo, so I'll wait until you get a picture of it. Now, I'm not getting royalties from Lee, but I do think this is a really good book for those of you, you're scientists and engineers. This is a good book to read for what happens when you encounter people who don't believe in science, which many of you I'm sure have. Good book to read. This is also a good book. Sander and John wrote this nice book about the psychology behind misinformation. Very accessible book. And again, I'm not getting royalties for it, but it's a really good book. I want to stop. You can hit the QR code if you want. That'll take you to our project's webpage. The webpage for this project is protectingtheelection.us. Pretty easy to find at Caltech. It's off our center's website. I want to say first off that not only has this research been supported by the Lynn Center for Science, Society, and Policy as part of our work in democracy, much of it's also supported by the John Haynes and Dora Haynes Foundation, which is a foundation here in Los Angeles that has supported a lot of research at Caltech over the years in this area of democracy and social science. A lot of the work here is also in collaboration with my colleague Betsy Sinclair, who's a professor at WashU. Betsy got her PhD here at Caltech a couple decades ago. Sander Linden is a colleague on this. And Mitchell Lininger is a current PhD student, and he's going to be the first author on these couple of papers that we're producing right now. So it's a lot of fun to work with Mitchell. Sabrina and Michelle Schaefer have helped us out here. So that's it. Now it's Q&A time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was interesting and very different from the talk that I heard in class. So
better or worse?
Better, much better. We got to also play with the chatbot, which was really exciting as well. So we're going to do a Q&A session. I saw some hands, but we're trying to do the questions through the Slido. So scan the QR code or go to slido.com and type in elections. It's very simple. I did see a couple questions already come up during the talk, so thank you for that. And one question I wanted to ask that I saw kind of in the questions as well is, what do you think the biggest misconceptions in terms of what voters are doing is out there right now? Because you talked a lot about the election administrators, but from the voter side, what are some things that people can kind of?
Oh, that's a good question. So a lot of the misconceptions that we see from the voters' perspective have to deal really with just how they vote. Unfortunately, voting in the United States is as many of you know, it's a complicated process, right? How you vote here in LA County is different than how you vote in Orange County. It's different than how you vote in Riverside County. And all of those differences make it very complicated for people to figure out how to vote. Because again, despite the fact that I'm a political scientist and I think everybody should care about elections and how to vote, most people don't pay a lot of attention to it because it's not something they do very frequently. So a lot of the misconceptions are dealing with things like, when do I have to return my ballot? What's the deadline for getting it in the mail? What happens if you get it in the mail late? Here in California, we have a rule that says as long as it's postmarked by election day and it's received within 7 days, it can be included in the tabulation. Okay, but that's not true in Arizona. It's not true in Nevada. So again, people hear that they can do things like return it late here in California. They may think that they can do that in other states, and it's simply not true. So a lot of the misconceptions, I think, deal with the process of voting and how to vote. And they get complicated when we deal with things like primaries, for example. Like some of you probably are California voters, like our top 2 primary. There's kind of these interesting, crazy rules about how many votes you can cast in different elections. Many voters are just poorly informed and have misconceptions about the process.
Thank you. The next question, I think there are a couple questions about the LLM model, but one question says, what is an LLM model for pre-bunking, and how can you be sure that there are no hallucinations in the model? I think you talked about the guidelines they've put in, but can you speak more to that?
Well, so with what we're doing, so essentially what happens is we take the article, we do a bit of prompt engineering, right? And we're running it through ChatGPT or Llama or a couple of different models like this, and we get the argument back. All right, so for us, this is basically then myself, Mitchell, Betsy, Sander, looking at that inoculation argument, comparing it to the original, right? and making sure that the inoculation argument is valid, that it hasn't, it's not producing additional misinformation, that the warning seems to be appropriate, that the softening of the argument is working. So there's a bit of basically human-aided work here that we're taking the LLM, we're looking at the results. If it doesn't seem to work, we just change the prompt and keep trying. Okay, so the human-assisted development here is important. Now this is better, we think, than the prior process, which was entirely done by human beings. So the prior process, including the work that Sander was doing before, would take the full exposure argument, and it would be him and the people in his research group really just literally sitting there and trying to write the inoculation argument, the softening and the warning language, right? And we think what the LLM can do is we think it can do it faster, probably better if we train it well, right? And again, try to be able to generate these kind of pre-inoculation arguments in near real time. But again, there's human-assisted involvement here, and that's really what we think prevents from hallucinations and mistakes from creeping in to the inoculation arguments.
I think building on that question, I like the analogy of inoculation, but presumably a malicious version of this kind of AI could use to infect someone. So what kind of worries do you have there, and where do you think we could go in preventing?
Right, so to be honest, really what all of this boils down to is what in social science we call persuasion, right? Persuasion can be used to persuade people in positive ways, right? To get them to believe in information, to believe in facts. It can also be used to persuade them to believe in myths and misinformation. So it can be used, right, by people who have bad motivations. There's nothing that we really can do about that. Obviously, we don't want them to do that. We hope that if they were to do that, we would detect it and see it and say something about it. But again, as scientists, a lot of times, and engineers, we build things, and they can be used by bad people for bad purposes, right? We want to try to mitigate that. We want to try to stay on top of it, but we can't necessarily prevent that. And to be honest, they're already doing it, right? So politicians, bad actors, people who want to spread misinformation and conspiracy theory, they're already doing it, right? And so what we're trying to do here is build tools that can help prevent it as best as we can.
And I think also building on that, the idea of taking these conspiracy theories and softening them before you present them to the audience kind of builds on this question of all good conspiracy theories have some basis in truth or plausible concerns. So how can we realistically address those risks? Do you think this method is foolproof?
No, I don't think it's foolproof. I think it helps, right? So I think what'll happen is that trying to, especially with conspiracy theories, right? Trying to deal with conspiracy theories is kind of like playing whack-a-mole, right? Once you think you develop the argument, right, that might help to stop people from believing in a particular conspiracy theory, it's gonna mutate like a virus, right? It's gonna change because people do need these conspiracy theories, right? They use them to develop arguments and understandings for how the world works. So they're not going to go away, right? We're not going to knock conspiracy theories down, and they're not going to disappear again like a virus. But again, what we can do here is try and help. I mean, I think the issue here is let's try to deal with the really pernicious conspiracy theories and misinformation, okay? The kinds that can damage our democracy, right? Bigfoot, I don't think Bigfoot's going to, people's belief in Bigfoot is going to damage our democracy. But I do think that people's beliefs in some of these misinformation, these conspiracy theories about elections can lead to some of the consequences like we saw on January 6th.
A little bit of a turn here, but I think we've all heard that, this is the most polarized time in our democracy, and we hear this on the news a lot. But in terms of maybe a historical context, how has the belief in election integrity and this sort of polarization changed over time?
That's a great question. So we are in a period of just amazing polarization. You all know that. I don't think I need to say that, right? We see it every day. But the good news and the bad news is America's been polarized like this in the past before. We've seen this in various periods in American history. The Gilded Age is an example. Civil War, Reconstruction is an example. The 1820s was an example where we had this kind of polarization. Misinformation has been around since, I think, the beginning of our democracy, and probably certainly before that. So these are problems that we've experienced before, and we will continue to experience them moving forward. That's also what makes me optimistic, right, about our democracy here in the United States as well as democracies throughout the world. We've experienced these kind of problems before, and we've gotten through them. So ultimately, I am optimistic that we're going to get through our current period. I don't know what it's going to look like once we get through it, but I think we'll get through it. It's going to be painful. It's going to take some time. But again, I do think that these kind of tools and these kind of approaches, getting people back to a point where they actually believe that our democracy works, that it works for them, that our political institutions, especially our electoral institutions, work and they're fair, will help us get through this period of polarization and maybe get back to a point where we have a little more civil discourse in our society.
Thank you. You talked about this in class, actually, about getting ballots in the mail that you said that were from your daughter who have moved. And someone has asked, at my house, I've received ballots from at least 6 former residents. So can you talk about what mechanisms would there be from preventing this person from casting their vote? And what do election officials do on their side to hopefully help this person get less mail, but eventually make sure these ballots aren't being cast?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is one that comes up repeatedly, and like I said, we talk about this one in class. My daughter, moved years ago. She lives in Wisconsin now, and she still does receive ballots in LA County. And I'm sure some of you've experienced this too, right? You get ballots for people who have moved. There are ballots that arrive sometimes for people who are deceased. That's less common, but it does happen. So what, on the one hand, what I would say first off is if that happens to you, let the election officials know, right? When you go to vote, like if you go show up and vote in person, you go to a vote center or polling place, bring those extra ballots with you and tell the people there that these people no longer live at this address. So try to do what you can as a citizen to try to prevent this, because not only does it lead some people to start to disbelieve in the integrity of our elections when there's lots of absentee ballots out there that may be going to people who no longer live at these addresses. It also helps our election officials, right? It saves us money as taxpayers if we're not sending out as many of these ballots. Now, what happens on the back end, and I would encourage any of you who are really interested in this to just go, probably starting election night, if you live in LA County or in Orange County or pretty much any of the counties in California. Most of them are going to have webcams. You're going to be able to actually watch. I mean, it's excruciatingly boring unless you're an election geek like me. But you can actually watch them as they receive the ballots. You can see exactly what they're doing. If you so want to do this, you can actually go see it in person too in California, right? You'd have to send them an email or give them a call in advance just to let them know you're showing up. But as a citizen, you can show up and watch the process as it works. The main mechanism here in California, all right, that's going to prevent someone from taking one of those extra ballots and casting it is the signature verification process. So as you all know, those ballots, if they're returned, they have to be returned in the envelope they were sent in, and there has to be a signature on the back, right? And our election officials go through excruciating steps to verify the accuracy of the signature that's on the back of that ballot with respect to the signature that's on file. So the signature that they have on file is one that is whatever is your most recent signature. So for many of us, that might be the signature that we did at DMV when we got our driver's license. It might be the last signature that was on the back of the ballot when you returned it last time. They're constantly updating those signatures to try to get around the issue that as we all get older, myself included, our signatures change, right? They also have the people who are engaged in the signature verification process go through kind of a long training to really understand the various ways that you check a signature to try to make sure it's the same person. So that's the main thing that's being done to try to prevent those additional or extra ballots from being cast by someone else. Now, there are other steps involved here too. Like one of the things that we'll be doing, and we have done in the past, is we actually follow the statistics on ballot return. In some jurisdictions, and Shaleka actually has done some of this herself, her own research, as she can talk about. Many places will actually give us data daily on who's returned their ballot and who's not, okay? And when that ballot's been returned, has it been challenged, right? In other words, does the signature not match, or there's no signature on it, or there's something else about the ballot? Voters whose ballots get challenged have the ability to cure their ballot, and that's what Shaleka studied actually a couple of years ago. We'll be working on studying some of this ballot curing process this fall. But we also are in the process, in many of these jurisdictions, tracking this information and looking for anomalous ballot returns. So to go back to the question, like one of the things we've looked at in the past in some of these jurisdictions that we work closely with, like Orange County and LA County, we look to see if there's abnormally high rates of ballot return from specific addresses, right? And so, again, we have historical data, how many ballots have been returned from these addresses in the past. And if we suddenly see a spike that all of a sudden, maybe an apartment building where historically a dozen residents have returned their ballots, we suddenly see that there's 2 dozen or 3 dozen, right? That sets off flags both for us and also election officials who are scanning this as well, and they would always investigate it. So there's a lot of safeguards in place. Sorry to kind of belabor this point, but there's a lot of safeguards in place to try to make sure that these extra ballots that get inadvertently sent out aren't cast and aren't tabulated.
I think that's good to know. And I think I'm looking at all these questions and I'm really liking all the questions about the study. It really shows that Caltech students stay questioning these research studies. So one question that I liked was, did you compare the persuasiveness of the LLMs compared to some sort of human talking to these survey participants? So how much more effective is LLM persuasion compared to a trained human?
Wonderful question, and we didn't do that. I wish we had the resources to do that. We just haven't been able to do that. Just to give you a quick sense for how these kind of studies work, that experiment that I talked about, where we were interviewing 4,000 American registered voters, we use a provider called YouGov. They're one of the major survey polling providers throughout the world. One of the vice presidents at YouGov is a former PhD student from Caltech. And so we work very closely with them on these sort of innovative kind of new studies that they like to do with partners like Caltech. But to do that kind of study where we're interviewing 4,000 people and then re-interviewing them 7 days later costs $40,000. Okay, $40,000. Yeah, exactly. So it's not cheap. So to do this kind of study, I'd love to have the resources to do it. We just didn't have it in the budget. The next study we're doing is going to interview 6,000 people. I think it's going to be $55,000 or $60,000 to do that. Luckily, WashU is paying for that, not me. But again, these studies aren't cheap, and that's a great one. I'd love to do it, but we just don't have the funding for it right now.
So in the interest of time, we're going to wrap up. Thank you so much for your talk. It was really interesting. And before you all leave, we do have a very quick survey. If you'd like to scan that and fill it out, it's only 3 questions. This will be a cheaper survey than your
Cheaper than mine, yeah. This one's free, yeah.
But thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for coming.